The Reserve Bank will also be taking into account those deflation figures last week that did surprise many. Now, some economists last week were predicting that off the back of those figures, the RBA might actually decide or weigh up whether to make an interest rate cut. That has now changed with data that's been released over the last couple of days, but also begs the question, what is going on in the Australian economy, and is the government doing everything it can to manage the transition from the mining investment boom to other sectors in our economy? I spoke to the Resources Minister, Josh Frydenberg, about this earlier today, and I also started by asking him about what might be in the budget and who is it going to be for.
Well, there'll be a lot in the budget for all Australians, and that's across a whole host of areas. You've already heard some indications about increased spending in health, increased spending in education, a more coordinated cities policy, as well as greater infrastructure spending. So there will be something in there for everyone.
Last week we did see some concerning deflation figures. The RBA will be weighing that up, no doubt, when it considers moving interest rates tomorrow. What does this tell you, this figure in particular, tell you about our transitioning economy from the mining investment boom to other services? Is this a sign that it's not going particularly smoothly, that the government isn't managing it well, or just that there'll be bumps along the road?
Well, quite the contrary. I think the message about the Australian economy is that it's in good shape. We are having 3% annual GDP growth, which is better than in Canada and the United States.
These
the UK,
deflationary
Japan.
figures were a bad sign, though, weren't they?
Well, no, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think if you look across the economy, whether it's the growth number, which is greater than other developed nations, or whether it's the jobs that have been created, 300,000 last year, the fastest since 2006, and interestingly, Laura, more women are entering the workforce now than men. That's a significant improvement. If you look at what's happened with the free trade agreements with China, Japan and Korea, I mean, just today it's been publicised the fact that wine exports from Australia, bottled wine exports, are up more than 60% since the China Free Trade Agreement has been entered into. Lobster exports are up more than 270%. Milk powder and so forth are up dramatically. In my resources sector, we're seeing increased volume. So I think there is a very good story to tell for the Australian economy, whether it's in growth, whether it's in employment, whether it's in business confidence. The NAB consumer survey today that the Prime Minister cited, the free trade agreements. We have to continue on the path of economic reform, and we do need to, for example, bring in the Australian Building and Construction Commission to do that. There's a number of things we want to do to improve the confidence and the strength of the Australian economy, but I think we're on the right trajectory.
As you keep on saying, as we hear from the Treasurer, the Prime Minister, this budget will be about jobs, growth and investment. If I can take you to the decision, well, pretty much the decision on S. Kidman and co, that has been effectively knocked back on national interest grounds. To be clear and to really encourage that investment, we need to be clear on the rules, and they're quite opaque at the moment.
Well, there's a couple of things to say. Firstly, foreign investment is very important and very good for Australia. We would have never developed the Pilbara, we would never developed the North West Shelf, we would have never developed the north of our country without foreign investment. We're a country of 24 million people with much larger economies, with much larger pools of capital elsewhere in the world that can help us develop our economy and our country. At the same time, we need a rigorous foreign investment review board process, and that is why the Treasurer has made this particular decision, or this preliminary decision in this particular case, because Kidman is the largest private land holding in the country.
Yes, but my point is that the rules aren't clear. I think it's acceptable to everyone that can see this decision that's been made by the Treasurer, that it is some of the largest agricultural, well, the largest agricultural land, makes up 2% of Australia. But for those companies overseas, in particular China, that do want to invest in Australia, what's your message to them? That these decisions are made in national interest on a case-by-case basis?
Well, they certainly are on a case-by-case basis. And as you say, it's 2.5% of the agricultural land. So it's at the discretion
of the Treasurer?
It's on the discretion of the Treasurer, taking into account important national interest considerations. And one of the factors that the Treasurer referred to in his press release at the time of making this preliminary decision around Kidman was the fact that as an aggregated land holding, representing 2.5% of the agricultural land in Australia, it didn't provide the opportunities for domestic buyers. Now, there's a whole range of factors that go into deciding a national interest. Can you see how that might be
a bit of an issue, though, for overseas investors wanting to invest in Australia because the lines aren't clear? Well, the benchmark is not clear.
I think Australia has a wonderful record of inviting and welcoming foreign investment. So I don't think this decision in any way will be detrimental to that. I mean, if you go back to Wayne Swan's time, he made a decision around the Australian Stock Exchange being purchased by a Singapore entity. If you go back to Peter Costello's time, he made a decision around Woodside being acquired by Shell. And if you go to Joe Hockey's time, he made a decision there about GrainCorp and ADM. So each of the treasurers have had their individual difficult cases to deal with, but in this case, the Treasurer has made an important decision, but I don't think in any way it is negative for our overall national interest in attracting foreign investment.
Final question. How important is a company tax here, whatever level it will be, and will this be paid for by cracking down on multinationals? Because, you know, will that be hypothecated spending, my question is, because Joe Hockey was unable to put a figure on that in the last budget because essentially the information there wasn't available to Treasury. That has all changed. So in this budget, when it's handed down tomorrow, will we see that figure, a firm figure of how much can be raised by cracking down on multinationals?
Well, I know the Treasurer and Treasury have been doing a lot of work following on from that announcement, which, you know, it was the last piece of legislation I think Joe Hockey introduced into the Parliament. And what was important about our multinational tax agenda was that the Labor Party voted against it. It got through the Parliament without the Labor Party's support because they were afraid to, you know, increase the resources as we have done for the ATO to tackle multinational tax avoidance. They were afraid to double the penalties as we have done against
But should we expect to see
avoidance.
A figure next to how much revenue can be gained from cracking down on multinationals tomorrow?
Well, that's why a lot of the country will be tuning in tomorrow night, Laura, to actually find the answers to these questions that you're positing me today. But the key point is we are clamping down on multinational tax avoidance. We want everyone to pay their fair share. We have better resourced the ATO to do that. We've strengthened the legislative framework, and unfortunately the Labor Party went missing.
Josh Frydenberg, thanks for your time.
Good to be with you.
And on Budget Eve, it appears there is a significant hole in Bill Shorten's costings when it comes to an increase in tobacco excise. I'll have details on that next, and I'll be speaking to Family First Senator Bob Day.